There's a lot of things that make supercars cool. The styling, the performance, the status symbol. But let's face it, one of the things that make supercars so cool and so different are the vertical doors. What's up? Welcome back to the Metalhead Car Show. I think it's every kid's dream to have a car with fun doors, whether it be your mom's Toyota Corolla or a Lamborghini. It's something that I think every car guy kind of wants just a little bit. But if you don't have Lamborghini or Renault money, what do? Well, you do one of these. Today we're going to be going over 6 of the cheapest cars you can get with vertical doors. Only rule with this list, I'm not going with the absolute cheapest price I could find. I'm going with something just slightly above that so I can have a realistic price on what you can actually get into these with. So let's get right into it. Starting off with the most powerful car on the list, something we see on a very regular basis, and that is a Tesla Model X. So the Tesla Model X doesn't need much of an introduction. You may love it, you may hate it, but nonetheless you know what it is. For the 1% who doesn't, the Tesla Model X was an SUV Tesla made back in 2016, 17 I think. And it was made with a lot of the same styling as you get from the Model 3 and the Model S. But it had a much higher roof, it was a much bigger vehicle, and it still had 2 trunks. What set this thing apart from a lot of cars though was its rear doors, because unlike every single other car that has standard doors in the front and back, this thing had falcon wing doors. The theory behind the falcon wing doors was it's not just hinged at the roof, but it's hinged in between the roof and the window, so the doors could fold right in and open up, giving yourself more space in tight areas. Now truthfully, the sensors always ended up being a little bit cautious towards how much space they really had, so it didn't quite work how Tesla wanted it to, but nonetheless, it's a very cool idea. I'll always give them that. In theory, the doors could also open up and roll over, which for pretty much all vertical doors is just not happening. So it is a pretty cool idea. The Model X you'd be getting into for this sort of price range, which I'll be getting into in a minute, would be the 75D. 75D is a range of about 400 kilometers. It makes about 400 horsepower, and it's still going to have a lot of the goofy shit that Tesla offers. What I found, again, there's going to be some cheaper versions, there's going to be more expensive versions, but you can get into one of these for about $35,000, putting it in 6th place on the cheapest cars with vertical doors. Actually, I didn't put it on the list, but a quick car I'll mention that also came in at around $35,000, but the Smart Crossblade that had the scissor wing doors on it. 5th place, car I love, car I got to film a long time ago, but the Brickland SV1. So the Brickland SV1 was kind of a unique car that came out of the 70s. Along with being a Canadian car, it was labeled the SV1, standing for Safety Vehicle 1. So along with having this kind of cool, pointy, Corvette-esque sports car design, it was actually made to be very, very safe. And the decision-making process on giving the Brickland gull-wing doors actually came from Malcolm Brickland. He figured if you gave the car gull-wing doors, you could actually lift up the lowest point of the door itself, and you could have more of a crash bar on the side next to the driver and passenger, making the car a little bit safer. And they gave it just the most complicated and unreliable door system to actually open, where there's 2 giant hydraulics and a motor on the inside, and there's only buttons to open the door. And as much as I love these things, if I ever bought one, I would rip that thing out immediately and put in the shocks you got from like an SLS Mercedes. Anyway, the Brickland's cool. It's pop-up headlights. Again, it has gull-wing doors. Most of them came with a Ford 351 Cleveland, which made about 160 horsepower. Some came with a Chrysler 360, which made about 200 horsepower, maybe 180 horsepower. And the bulk of them are automatic. Nonetheless, you can get into one of these things for about $30,000, putting it in 5th place on the list. Next up, we're kind of talking about 2 cars. Now we're mainly focusing on one, but they share the exact same body, platform, and engine, so we'll be looking at the Mazda AZ1 and Suzuki Kara, mainly the Mazda though. So these things are part of the K-Car platform, which is made to make just tiny little cars in Japan, and they made like 60 horsepower from a 3-cylinder and somehow sound pretty good. What set the AZ1 aside from everything else was, despite being this tiny little thing, it was made to seat someone that was 6'6", and it came with gull-wing doors and a mid-engine design. It wasn't the only mid-engine car. The Honda Beat also had one, but the AZ1 set itself apart just a little bit. With the AZ1 making its way to North America, the prices have started to go up on them because they're such a cool little novelty item, and you can get into one for $15,000. So I mentioned the Suzuki Kara earlier. The Kara was essentially the exact same car. I'm figuring they may have made a little bit less of them because the Kara, I kept finding them for about 25 grand. So that's why I mainly talked about the AZ1. They're the same car, but the AZ1's a lot cheaper, putting it in 4th place. Next up, and this is going to be one that's kind of splitting hairs a little bit, but the Bradley GT. So the Bradley GT might be a bit of a controversial car for the list, purely because it was a kit car. It's made to be a kit car for the Volkswagen Beetle. So underneath all of its kind of cool, sharp, pointy designs with gullwing doors on it, it did actually have the full mechanical bits of a Volkswagen Beetle. There's another kit car that was on the list. It was the Eagle SS. Again, it was made for the Beetle. It was made for the Ford Cortina, I think. But whilst making this list, I could find one for sale. So I really couldn't find enough data to give an educated opinion on this thing, as when I could actually go find Bradley GTs. And if you wanted the Bradley GT, you're looking at about $11,000. As neat as these things are, it's the cheapest car with gullwing doors on the list. I don't know if I could actually do this. It's a neat car, but it makes no power whatsoever. You could probably swap a Porsche engine into it, but at that point, you could get something a lot better for less money, or at least less time. Nonetheless, it's made its way on a 3rd place on the list. Next up, a fan favorite and icon of one of the most influential cars on this list, but the Toota Sara. The Toota Sara was a pretty low production hatchback for Japan. What set this thing aside, though, from everything else was its butterfly doors. Now, as the story goes, Gordon Murray actually saw this thing when it was new and thought the butterfly doors was so inspiring, he actually decided to put those doors on the McLaren F1 just because of how much he loved it on the Sara. Now, the only downside to the Sara is its drivetrain. It had a 1.5 liter 4-cylinder that made 110 horsepower on an automatic transmission. These things were not fast, they're just cool. And frankly, of everything on this list, I'd probably buy the Sara first. I love the Brickland, but the Sara is notably less money, probably more reliable. And honestly, if you wanted to go drop, let's just say a turbo Celica engine in this thing, it would probably be a riot. So maybe at some point in the future, who knows? Life's weird. But if you wanted to get into one of these things, it's gonna cost you about $10,000, putting it 2nd place on the list. Next up, and well, 1st place on the list, it has a funny name, it's small, it's cute, and it makes no power whatsoever, and it's the Renault Twizy. The Renault Twizy was made to be this kind of city commuter, a tiny little car, takes up no space whatsoever, but it's making the list because it has scissor wing doors. Something that was likely completely unnecessary for this car, but very cool nonetheless. Now, the Twizy is an EV. It came with 2 motor options. The big boy, the powerful one, making 17 horsepower. And for the entry-level version, I'm just going to give you a minute to guess. Just think of an educated guess for what this could be making. No, it's making 5.4 horsepower. So for those who see the novelty in this, you can get into one for about $6,500. Not much money, but even for that price, I don't know if I could. So that was my list of the cheapest cars with vertical doors you can go out and buy. But I want to know, what do you think? Is there anything I missed? I would love to know, because I went through this list as thoroughly as I could. There's a lot of cars I looked through and saw what the pricing was, but these are the cheapest cars I could find. So if there's anything, let me know. But also, of the 6, which one would you buy? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Like, subscribe, enjoy what you've seen. I tend to post on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, and I'll see you later.